Hello, you have made it. You are here, and you know what? It is almost time for the show to start. So, all together now, let the countdown begin.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, and welcome to today's Flip event. I'm your host, George Miller from Team Flip. And before we meet our special guest, I want to invite all of you to jump in the chat and tell us where you're from. Let us know where you're tuning in from, who you're with, and also send us your questions. We have a cool opportunity to answer these questions live here on the event. And again, I want to shout out and people that are joining right now. We have Mr. Edwards class, grade 5 from Fort Macleod, Alberta, Canada. Miss Matthews, 4th grade class. Iowa City online learners. Actually, I lived in Iowa City for a bit, so hello. Norwalk Law Miranda IS group, hello to your 4th and 5th graders. Fatima from Egypt, Fluffy Bears, 5th grade class. Oh my goodness, so excited to have you all here. And all of you watching, teachers, parents, scholars, have your cameras ready because we have a chance to take a selfie with our special guest. And all right, without further ado, let's travel to Cody, Wyoming in the United States to meet George Miller from the Buffalo Bill Center of the West to learn all about Yellowstone hotspots. How's it going, George?
Going well. How are you today?
I'm doing great. This is a whole lot of George power we have on here. We have George Prime, George Alpha, maybe some George Betas in the audience. Just really excited to have you with us.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's a beautiful day here in Cody, Wyoming. The temperature's cooling off and fall is in the air. We're supposed to have snow in the mountains this weekend, so yeah, fall has arrived.
Oh man. All right. Well, I know you have a special presentation for some learning, so I'm going to kick it over to you to kick that off.
Great, thanks. Well, we're talking today about the Yellowstone Hotspot. Living here in Yellowstone country, we're just right on the east gate of Yellowstone here in Cody. And so when we go to Yellowstone, we see all the beautiful thermal features and the geysers and mud pots. And it's a beautiful national park, lots of wildlife and lots of flora and fauna. But today we're going to talk about what's powering all that heat coming out in Yellowstone. Yellowstone is actually, much of the park is inside the last eruptive caldera of Yellowstone. There have been 3 eruptions in Yellowstone. We'll talk about those toward the end. But we want to talk about what powers all of that, and it's the Yellowstone Hotspot. So the Yellowstone Hotspot is a plume. And we're going to talk about plumes and hotspots today. Here is a typical feature at Yellowstone National Park. You can see the steam coming off this hot pool. You can look at the brilliant colors, and those are called thermophiles. So those thermophiles are little tiny microbes that live by this very hot water, and they're able to then survive in this water, and they have those brilliant. All right, well, let's go on and start thinking more about what powers all of this. And it's massive. It's not a little thing. It's a great big thing called a hotspot. Well, let's go first and take a look at tectonic plates. The Earth is broken into a bunch of different pieces, and these tectonic plates move around. Now, Earth has these tectonic plates, but some planets don't. For example, Mars, we haven't been able to detect any kind of tectonic plates on Mars. Nothing's moving, but there are giant volcanoes. So the thought is that probably those volcanoes come from hotspots or plumes. We'll know more about that as we learn more about Mars. But these plates are all moving and putting pressure on each other. And what happens is oceanic plates are heavier than continental plates and usually get dragged underneath the continental crust. And so that's called subduction. So that's the source of many volcanoes in the world. If we think about something called the Ring of Fire that goes all the way around the Pacific Rim, that's the Ring of Fire. And that Ring of Fire is full of volcanoes. But you know, when you think about a volcano, you usually think about a big mountain sticking up with a little stuff coming out of the top. That's one kind of volcano, but the volcanoes we're talking about are motivated by these upwelling plumes. And many times they form calderas, and we'll talk about calderas in just a second. But plumes, so way, way, way down in the deepest part of the Earth, 1,000 kilometers beneath the surface, is the core of the Earth. And there's two parts to the core, the inner core and the outer core. The outer core is liquid. It's so hot and so pressurized down there that all these materials down there are liquid. Right at that core mantle boundary, we start to see things coming up, hotter areas coming up from the core mantle boundary. And one of those plumes reaches the surface at Yellowstone. That's that hot spot. How do we know all of this stuff? Now, people always ask me, oh, how do you know this stuff? Well, if you've ever had a broken leg or you've known somebody who's gone and had an MRI is a lot like what we're seeing here. This is an MRI of the Earth, if you will. So when there are earthquakes release different kinds of waves, P waves and S waves. They travel at different speeds, and they travel through hot material at a different rate than they travel through cold material. And so with imaging, we can actually see the hot spot at the core mantle boundary coming all the way up to the surface of the Earth. So it's pretty amazing. We have a picture from inside the Earth, 1,000 kilometers deep in the Earth. I think science is so cool because as technology comes along, we learn so much more and we can make visualizations of these things. All right, well, plate and plume interact. So those plumes coming up from deep inside the Earth, about 70 million years ago, the plume got toward the surface, but it was under the ocean. So it was under the ocean plate, the Pacific plate, and it was under there that it first started coming out to the surface, and it made seamounts or little mountains in the sea. Now, as the North American plate moved to the southwest over millions of years, some of that material got pushed up onto the North American plate and became what is now Washington, Oregon, California. That's all new crust that was added to the North American plate. And this plume continues to come up. Now, the thing about plumes is they don't move relative to the plates much. There's a little bit of wiggle, but mostly they're stationary. So as the crust of North America moved to the southwest, it moved right over that plate. And it took a long time for those plumes to melt through to the surface of the Earth. So we've got the coast ranges in Washington and Oregon that were pushed up onto North America from basalt that was erupted from the Yellowstone hotspot, probably. And we say probably in science a lot because, as you know, new information can come along and change everything. So science is always changing based on the evidence that comes in. About 35 to 45 million years ago, it was trapped underneath not only the oceanic plate, but also the continental crust. And then starting about 20 million years ago, it burned through that subducted oceanic plate and got to the crustal material and found all those little cracks in the crust, those faults that cause earthquakes, and that magma started coming up. Now let's think about magma for a minute. We all know what lava is because if you've been online at all, you can go to YouTube and you can see some really cool lava right now from Iceland and from Hawaii. Those volcanoes all over the Earth are erupting continually, but there's some great video from those. So you can see that lava flowing around. And then when it's under the Earth, it has a different name. It's called magma. But there's different kinds of magma, just as there are different kinds of lava. So the Yellowstone hotspot originally erupted a lot of basalt, a very large igneous province, a very large amount of basalt. And if you look, here's the state of Washington, Montana, Idaho, Oregon, Nevada, and California, and Utah and Wyoming in the western United States. And you can see those dark areas are the Columbia River basalts. And those Columbia River basalts are pretty amazing amount of land. Look, it goes all the way up into toward northern Washington and all the way out to the ocean in Oregon, down the Columbia River, and that's where they got their names, the Columbia River basalts. and then all the way down into Nevada. So that stuff is pretty amazing. And then we get eruptive calderas starting about 16 million years ago that went right up the East Snake River Plain. So we'll take a look at that. Here is those basalt flows in Washington. This is near a place called Dry Falls. It's not far from the Grand Coulee in Washington State. And you can see line after line of basalt. Now, let's think about basalt for a minute. I want you to visualize with me. Use your imagination with me for a minute. And let's think about ketchup. That seems weird, doesn't it? But imagine I had a paper plate in my hand and I had some ketchup on it. Now, if I turn that paper plate, the ketchup will start rolling down the plate. Ketchup is about the same thickness or viscosity, about the same thickness as basalt. It's runny, it runs around, it flows. So the Columbia River basalt flows are just that, layer after layer of ketchup. Oh, no, basalt that's been placed on the surface of the earth. Okay, so that's one kind of lava. Now let's go to the next kind. These are basalt mountains. Well, how did that work? Wouldn't all that basalt just run off those mountains? Well, these mountains were laid down on the flat, and then over the last 17 million years, there's a fault that goes right along the bottom of those mountains, and there's been earthquake after earthquake after earthquake, and this valley has fallen as the mountains have gone up. So we've got all these basalt flows in Yellowstone. This is Steens Mountain. It's a pretty amazing place if you're ever out in that part of the country. Well, that Yellowstone Hotspot track is associated with eruptions. So unlike basalt, we have another kind called rhyolite, and that rhyolitic flows are sticky, kind of like peanut butter. So imagine if I put some peanut butter on that plate, that peanut butter wouldn't go anywhere. It's too sticky and too thick, and that's about the thickness of rhyolite. So gases build up underneath that rhyolite, and what we get are explosive volcanoes called, in the modern world, we call them supervolcanoes if they erupt more than 1,000 cubic kilometers of material. So these guys are big, big eruptions, unlike anything we've ever seen in history, ever. And there have been some big volcanoes, but they're small compared to these supervolcano eruptions. And as the North American plate has moved to the southwest, that plume has stayed stationary, and we get this age progressive group of volcanoes going off all the way up the Snake River Plain. Well, let's take a look at a place on the Snake River Plain. This is the Garbage River that has cut through basalt flows. Look how deep that basalt is. And you can see layers in there. So this was all laid down flat. And these basalt flows erupted after the caldera. The Bruno Garbage caldera is a complex of calderas, and those were big holes in the ground. And then after they went off, all that rhyolite came out, then the basalt could come up from deeper in the earth and flow over the surface. So pretty amazing, amazing place, isn't it? All right, let's go on and talk specifically about Yellowstone National Park. Now, right outside Yellowstone National Park is the Island Park caldera and the Huckleberry Ridge caldera and the Lava Creek caldera. These are all ancient calderas over 1 million years, 2 million for Huckleberry Ridge, 1.3 for Island Park, and Lava Creek 640,000 years ago. So not that long ago when you start to talk about geologic time, kind of recently. All right. Well, of course, we know that that's what's powering the Yellowstone Hotspot today. That Yellowstone Hotspot is powered by this plume coming up from deep, deep inside the earth all the way to the surface. And this stuff is hot. So when we think about all the kinds of things that magma, all the kinds of different kinds of magma, they're very, very hot. I like to tell people, if you've ever been around a fire, like maybe a campfire or a barbecue grill or something like that, you see little flames. Those are about 600 degrees Fahrenheit, and lava is about that basalt or the rhyolite is about 1,250 degrees Fahrenheit. And the basalt can be 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's not the kind of thing you want to get involved in when don't touch lava if you ever see it. It's very, very hot. It's so hot that the rock is molten and flows along the ground. That Yellowstone hotspot is continuing to power all of these thermal features that we see in Yellowstone. And someday it will go off. Now, that's the question everybody wants to know. When's it going to go off again? It will probably be a long, long time before it goes off again, because it has discharged so much material from the top of the plume. That plume needs to melt crust and recharge. So that's going to be probably maybe a million years. I'm sorry, a million years from now. It'd be really cool to see it, but not anytime soon. Sometimes you hear things on the internet about, oh, it's going to go off any minute. You can go look at the University of Utah Yellowstone Volcano Observatory. And the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory has lots of seismometers and GPS to watch for earthquakes and any signs of eruption. And right now, we're at a normal level in Yellowstone. Okay. So I think I want to just show you a couple of things. When we were talking about rhyolite, this is a piece of rhyolitic lava. That's that thick peanut butter kind of lava that I was talking about. I've got a little tiny piece of basalt here. You can't see much. It's very small, but it is the really hot fluid, kind of like ketchup. And then I've got one more piece of lava here. Oh, if I can lift it, see if I can lift it. This is called pumice. Actually, pumice will float on water because there's so much gas trapped in there. And that's associated with some of the eruptions as well. All right, so I think that's what I've got to say about the hotspot, but I'm pretty sure we've got some questions.
Yeah, we do. Thank you again, George, for going through that. Like, I geek out all about volcanoes, and this was incredible to learn more. You know, lava, magma, the way that it flows. Also, like, you know, how one volcano has a time to erupt. But I have to say again, the chat is erupting with questions right now, and we will get to them very soon. So keep them coming. But in the meantime, we're going to take a selfie with you, George. So everyone out there, scholars, teachers, get camera ready, squeeze in front of your screens at home or the classroom, wherever you're watching, and we'll give you a few seconds to get set up while me and George get warmed up. So we're going to cue that music.
Selfie time.
All right, I think we're about ready. George, will you do the honors and count us down?
Okay, get ready for selfie in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Volcano!
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, George. I hope everyone out there is having a great time. And we'd love to see those selfies. So if you have them and want to share them on social, be sure to tag Microsoft Flip and at Center of the West. Again, thank you again, George, for that moment. And now to some questions. So are you ready, George? I guess I should prep you.
I'm ready.
All right. Layla from the chat is asking, can people swim in the Yellowstone caldera?
Oddly enough, yes. So the caldera is really, really big, and one big piece of the caldera is covered by Yellowstone Lake. So there's actually a lake right over the caldera. Now, down at the bottom of the lake are geysers and hot springs, just like on the surface, but they're so far deep down, it's about 400 feet deep. So it doesn't affect the surface water. So yeah, you could swim in the caldera of Yellowstone in Yellowstone Lake. Although I must warn you, it's very, very cold most of the year.
Wow, what a twist. I love that question, Layla. That's a really good question.
It's a great question, yeah. Yeah.
Mrs. Killian's third grade class has a question. What is lava made out of?
Okay, what is lava made out of? Well, down deep in the earth, as I said, in the mantle, there's melted plates that have fallen down in our, when we looked at that one slide, the plates have fallen down and they remelt and sometimes get pulled back up. So it's made of whatever materials are there. Now, as you get toward the core, the heavier materials are pulled toward the core of the earth because of gravity. And so the core is liquid metal, basically. It's the heaviest elements, and then the lighter elements as you get toward the top. Now, when we get right to the crust of the earth, as we get that magma coming up out of the earth, it melts what's called country rock, or a rock that's around the caldera. That gets melted too, and that gets erupted. So there's lots of different materials, and that's part of the fun of geology, is once you find a volcano or evidence of a volcano, you look at all the different kinds of materials that were erupted, and you can learn more about the history of that volcano.
Very interesting. So just a kind of a moshpodge of different stuff that's all a part of that lava.
Yeah.
As a nice follow-up question, the ISA online class is asking, how much time does it take for magma to freeze? Interesting question.
To solidify, yeah.
Yeah.
So it depends on the kind of lava. Remember, we talked about the rhyolitic. This is called a volcanic bomb because it solidified on the way down. So this was molten. It went up in the air, and on its way down through the air pushed against the outside. You can see how it's shaped almost like a raindrop, and it froze in that or solidified in that shape on the way down to the earth. So that can happen very quickly depending on what kind of lava it is. And if you look at the pictures, if you go online and look at, say, in Iceland, sometimes it's this, crinkly, crackly lava called pahoihoi, and it's just or excuse me, it's called and it's almost like it's solidifying, and then it remelts as more lava pours over it. So yeah, it can happen very quickly.
That's fascinating, because I think about, like, you mentioned, like, it comes down and it's like hardening, like kind of like snow almost, but it's like the reverse. Like it's like warm and then it's too cold, and it's like, that's just boggling. That's interesting.
It's amazing. Yeah, and those volcanic bombs, you have to watch out for those because they're solid pieces of lava falling out of the sky. So if you're ever around volcanic bombs, don't get too close.
Another question for Mrs. Swanger's class is, why was Yellowstone named Yellowstone?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, the original people that lived here, of course, Native Americans, did not call it Yellowstone. In the languages of almost every tribe in our area, it's called the Elk River because there were so many elk there. When people of European English speakers came, they saw all this yellow rock because there's a lot of sulfur that comes out as a part of the volcano, and those hydrothermal features will leach that sulfur out, and sulfur is bright yellow, as you know. And so they looked at it and said, oh, look at all that yellow rock. And that transformed into Yellowstone. So it's the Yellowstone River and the Yellowstone National Park.
I love it. That's nice to know the history behind it, because I am also curious, like, all the Yellowstones around, but the first people to see it definitely saw the Yellowstone. Makes a ton of sense. Another question from the same class, Mrs. Swinger's class: how deep is the underground supervolcano?
Okay, so the volcano, the last time Yellowstone caldera went off. So what happens is when a caldera goes off, all this rhyolite comes out, And then the whole earth collapses back down to make a caldera. Caldera means bowl in Spanish, and so it's just think of a bowl, like a bowl. That's what the caldera is. It's like a big bowl that has collapsed into the volcano. That caldera, the last time it went off, was about 3,000 feet deep. From the surface of the land down to the bottom of the caldera was about 3,000 feet deep. Today, it's filled in. There have been basalt flows, right? After the rhyolite evacuates, you get the basalt flows, and the basalt has built up that caldera now so that, the edge of the caldera in some parts of the park is maybe 1,000 feet at this point. It's very impressive when you drive off the edge of the caldera down into those geyser basins like Old Faithful. That's right down in the bottom of the caldera.
Wow, that's incredible. So I think 3,000 feet is what you said? 3,000 feet?
Yeah.
Would be how deep. Wow, that's incredible. Well, that wraps up our time for questions. Thank you to everyone that submitted those questions. Thank you, George, for answering them. I feel like we learned a ton. But I want to give the kind of closing remarks to you. Any final thoughts you want to share with everyone watching today?
Well, two things I would probably want everybody to remember. One is that geology thinks about time in a very different way than we do. We think about, I can hardly wait for the football game tonight. It seems like it's never going to happen. But that's just nothing to a rock. When we talk about geology, we're talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years of time to see these changes. So that's one thing I like about geology, is just thinking about time in a different way. And two, we have all kinds of virtual field trips. There's going to be a Yellowstone Hotspot virtual field trip this year from the Center of the West. And so if you go to our Learn page on our website, centerofthewest.org, you can find all about our virtual field trips and join us for a Hotspot field trip, virtual field trip.
Well, thank you so much. And I agree, like the study of geology is so interesting, especially like the time, like get that patience, with all.
Yeah, and geologists are the coolest people that there are. So if you're at all interested in geology, go for it.
I love it. Well, I agree with you. They rock. And we'll have like a sound thing like later. But thank you again, George. I learned so much.
Okay.
So appreciate your time. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
That was amazing, and that wraps up today's event. And now the learning and inspiration is never over. So you can head on over to flip.com/Buffalo Bill to find today's group so you and your learners can reflect on everything they learned today in the event. And even though we're wrapping up for today, we have a Flip events every week. So you can head on over to aka.ms/Flip events to find an adventure that sparks your curiosity. That's it for today. I'm your host, George Miller, and on behalf of Flip, Buffalo Bill Center of the West, and George Miller, thank you for spending time with us, and we'll see you next time.